to make sure it serves the needs of the country. Some of the challenges we've come across, and I think these challenges are not just challenges for the training, but they're at the core of being able to achieve mainstreaming environment, disaster risk reduction and climate change. Because it's site-specific, it's very challenging for us to know whether we're really making an impact by disseminating this information. We don't know if the participants go out and actually implement any of this. So what we do is try and keep in touch with them when there's new knowledge produced, disseminate that knowledge, and somehow and try and make sure that we're in touch with them to see if there has been any follow-up, because this follow-up is also useful for us to know whether to report back at a global level to donors, to decision makers, saying there is uptake, there is a desperate need for this, and therefore these are the most recent actions that have been taken following the training. We try and link them with, there's many of our offices at national and regional levels, all the 14 organizations, so we try and link our participants to our local offices so that there's more opportunities for them to come up with concrete projects, concrete follow-up actions, potentially through our offices or in collaboration with a few of our offices in the partnership. Some of the challenges, there may not be senior management support for implementation. When you talk about integrating different areas of work, there's a lot of insecurity over job losses, there's insecurity over demotion, funding cuts. So a lot of ministries may not be very keen on that. So even if we have the participants take this course, if they go back, we're not quite sure whether they'll get this senior support to be able to have integrated approaches to these three areas. So one of the things we've tried to do is conduct this disseminate this information in the context of an ongoing project. Often projects are done in collaboration with governments, NGOs, communities, and they already have a convened stakeholder group. So try and target them to understand why they should, within that project, they should address 3 issues and not just look at one lens and focus on one issue. And again, so to make sure that the training structure is easily adapted to various different levels. Often in the training, we pick a real site of the country and we try and get them to do an action plan as a result, as a concrete outcome of this training for a real site. In Sri Lanka, they had a site which they made a project proposal on during the training, and they were actually able to get some funding and be able to do some concrete follow-up work after this. I think also it's very important when we try and catalyze this kind of change that there's a common understanding for which you need adequate representation and participation from climate change managers, disaster risk managers, and environment practitioners, and development planners, or civil protection agencies. There has to be the right people with the right representation on the table, otherwise we don't get any integrated approaches in these areas. There has to be and therefore, because there's such a broad base of audience, we just need to make sure there's flexible and a whole range of modules so that we can find a way to bring everybody on the same page at the same basic level so that they can start off working together, or at least identifying how to work together. For us, the training needs assessment has been really, really useful in being able to capture some of this preliminary stock take of what that country lacks and what that country is strong in, so that we're able to modify the material as such. In trying to show the links, we can come across as looking very conceptual and abstract. So because the knowledge is building, there isn't a big knowledge base, but at the same time there is enough to start communicating. Now when we start communicating the concepts and the links, often we're told that this is very conceptual. So we've tried to make sure that it's case study based learning. The participants themselves start talking about the links and share with each other, as well as ground this whole conceptual learning into some field sites within the country. Now, some quick overall challenges in integrating the RRCC in environment. A lot of the times the countries tell us it goes back to funding mechanisms. The adaptation fund, the humanitarian aid, conservation funds, all in parallel. It's very difficult for countries or for project managers have integrated approaches when the funding frameworks are so isolated from each other. Global decision-making and policy frameworks. UNISDR has its processes, IPCC has its processes. How do we actually work around these challenges so that we are not caught in these different parallel processes and therefore can't work across each other's areas of practice? Very typical lack of coordination amongst ministries at national level. Interestingly, last week I was at the International Disaster Risk Conference in Davos, and we had a presentation from Vietnam. And Vietnam's decided to establish a joint institutional responsibility for climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and environment management under the Rural Development and Agriculture Ministry. So they don't have these things as separate. Within the development portfolio, agriculture portfolio, they have a joint responsibility for these three areas of work. So if we can start catalyzing some of those kind of changes, I think we'll be able to mainstream these three areas a lot more effectively. And fourthly, as Steve mentioned in his presentation, access to information. Very, very important, very challenging to address, and access to information that actually demonstrates the links and incentives for having these integrated approaches. This is something we're currently trying to address, and it remains a challenge. Thank you very much.
We're going to invite the panelists to come up and sit up here so we can take some questions.
I just want to thank all of the speakers again and all of you for staying here for the whole session. I think we've seen we've heard from a lot of different perspectives about some of the ecological science challenges and uncertainties associated with integrating disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and environmental sustainability by Steve and Mark. And I think Jayendra did a great job of introducing some of the social uncertainties that interact with those ecological uncertainties, the challenges that present with respect to disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation. And then we heard from both Derek and Radhika about some of the practical ways in which the private sector and governments are trying to implement the knowledge we do have into some of their strategies. So I think we've had a really interesting discussion. And I'd like to, rather than asking the panelists questions myself, I want to go ahead and open it up.